Good morning, everyone. I'm Rob Henkin, President of the Wisconsin Policy Forum. As you know, our annual Salute to Local Government kicks off about an hour from now. We'll again be celebrating outstanding public sector performance, but this year, of course, we'll do so in a virtual format. It is also worth noting that this year we've added two special awards categories for performance related to the pandemic. And we are conducting this special program to reflect on what this crisis has taught us about the present and future of public sector service in Wisconsin. Before we get to our program, just a few words of thanks. First, I want to thank our Salute sponsors who make it possible each year to stage this unique event. Their logos are on your screen now. Next, I want to thank those who purchased virtual tables for today's event. Again, a list of those who did so is on your screen. Finally, I want to thank all of you for participating in this morning's event. Our individual donors and the guests who are joining us for this program, we are very grateful for your support. It ensures not only the ongoing sustainability of Wisconsin's only nonpartisan independent public policy think tank, but it also supports the very important research and events like this one. And now it's on to our program. While it is difficult to cite any positive elements associated with the pandemic, perhaps one bright spot is the increased awareness that it has hopefully generated about the critical nature of local government and school district services and employees. Unfortunately, this heightened awareness has also occurred at a time when our ability to sustain local government and school district service levels has never been more at risk, given the intensifying financial challenges at all levels of government in Wisconsin. And perhaps even more alarming, just sustaining pre-pandemic service levels will not be enough. Instead, local governments and school districts will be asked to do more as our public health, public safety, and public assistance needs expand in the weeks and months to come. Given their magnitude and relevance, we wanted to discuss these issues prior to this year's Salute. And to do so, we have put together a very impressive panel consisting of this year's individual Salute Award winners. Our panelists are not only an exceptional group in terms of talent and wisdom, but they are also a diverse group in terms of age, gender, race, experience, geography, and the types of public sector entities they represent. I'll introduce them now in alphabetical order. Abby Attoon is the Director of Planning and Community Development at the City of Middleton. She is the winner this year of our Gene B. Tyler Leader of the Future Award, which recognizes an up-and-coming public servant under the age of 40 for outstanding performance. TJ McCrae is the Director of Instructional and Library Media Services at the Madison Metropolitan School District, and he is the winner of our Excellence Under Pressure Award, which cites a non-elected public sector employee who stood out in his or her work to respond to a pandemic-created challenge. Dale Peters, until he retired just a few weeks ago, was the longtime city manager at the city of Eau Claire. He delayed his retirement earlier this year so he could lead the city during this time of crisis. He is the winner of the 2020 Norman N. Gill Award for Individual Excellence in Government. And finally, last but not least, Diane Robertson is retired administrator, clerk, and treasurer at the Village of Thiensville. She is the recipient of this year's James R. Ryan Lifetime Achievement Award for her many years of service in Thiensville and other Wisconsin municipalities. So thanks again to all of you for joining us this morning. Congratulations on your honors. I'll begin by asking a few questions of our panelists, and we'll then invite questions from our audience. So audience members, please submit any questions right now or at any time during the program by clicking on the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen. So let's start now our discussion. I want to begin by sort of testing the hypothesis I just mentioned with all of you. Do you feel that you and your current or former colleagues in the public sector are better appreciated and respected in the wake of the pandemic than they were previously? So perhaps in keeping with our alphabetical order, we'll ask Abby. We'll put you on the spot to respond to that question first.
I would say absolutely yes, because I think that members of our community are seeing the critical role that different city services play in maintaining a quality of life. So, for example, with the closure of several departments that our residents rely on, like the library, the public recreation programs, the senior center, people are really feeling how much they rely on those services for socialization, to access education in our community. And I think that more so than ever, people are realizing like how much they rely on those and how important they are. And I don't work for a school district, but I would also submit that as a parent who is trying to work from home while teaching a pre-K student and a first grader virtually, I'm guessing that people are realizing how important the public school system is during this time. And I know I, for one, cannot wait until the schools reopen and I'm able to send my kids back to someone who is actually trained to teach them. So I would say yes, unequivocally yes.
So thanks, Abby. So TJ, of course, you do work for a school district. So what's your take? Do you feel better appreciated than you were pre-pandemic?
I think Abby said it best, right? I think that parents are beginning to appreciate the role of the teacher more so now than ever. Because during this pandemic, like Abby is saying, like I am learning or trying to work as well as teach my kids with the help of the teachers. But especially when you think about like our younger students, no matter how much work the teacher does online, they just need more help and attention. So I think that people are just starting to recognize and value the role of the educator more so now than ever.
Thanks, TJ. Dale, any thoughts on this question?
Sure, thank you. I would agree that yes, or hopefully yes. Certainly when the initial lockdown and stay at home happened, just an appreciation that the water still came in your house, and that when you flushed your toilet, and if you did need an emergency service, that a police officer or firefighter would come, and the 911 center was still available. So I think right off the bat, hopefully people appreciated that those really core basic city services that citizens need and our residents need, that they were available to them. So I hopefully that was there. I think the election showed the value, particularly the April election, the value in what local services can provide in terms of being able to have an election, and that even got better, of course, as we went into the fall election. And then our parks, to Abby's point, the parks and our, we've got 32 miles of trail here in Eau Claire that, they just really got used a lot. So, the fact that we could keep them open and operating is good. And I certainly agree with Abby and TJ that the value of teachers has been elevated. And that can't help but be a good thing long-term for us.
So Diane, you were not in the trenches over the past several months, given that you retired a little while ago, but obviously you've had a wealth of experience in local government. I'm interested in just, first of all, your perception overall, even pre-pandemic, about what is public perception with regard to public sector workers these days. And I'm sure you've still been in touch with colleagues in government and still have some perspective on how the pandemic may have changed things, either to the good or the bad.
I'm hoping that they're still getting their just rewards from the citizens, but I'm fearful that with all the negative press regarding fraud in elections, that things like that are going to be pointed to the local people that serve, and I'm hoping that does not occur. But I'm trying to be positive about that.
Thanks, Diane. So I actually just want to follow up with Dale.
If I could build on that, we haven't talked about local health officers. And I think there's a very mixed opinion about this. Some people are very, very appreciative of the work that's being done by our local health officers and that they're out on the front lines of this. But, as Diane said, the polarization that's happening is also villainizing our, very, very competent public health officers that are doing the best they can when we've been told we have to deal with this at the local level, right? And we're not getting necessarily the state guidance for a variety of reasons that we might want or support. And they're on the front lines of this. And so I think they have been elevated quite a bit, but I do fear the backlash long term about, public health and, what is the public's response going to be to public health going forward. And so very mixed and very polarized, very strong emotions, both positive and negative. There certainly with the election piece, but then I think even more so with the public health officers.
And not to beat a dead horse, and we'll get to our other panelists in just a moment, but Dale, you were not working in Eau Claire during the November election, but you were still in your role as city manager during 2 previous elections that occurred since the pandemic broke. On the one hand, you look at this, and to me, it's democracy in action. I think so few people think about what it takes to actually run an election, and just the number of public sector employees and volunteers, and how they have to be so carefully coordinated and trained and calibrated. And this should be a time ostensibly when we should be celebrating that, yet obviously, and we're not looking at all to get political here, but obviously there's now been some issues raised about whether our elections have been conducted freely and fairly. So any longer term impacts of that you want to comment upon?
Sure. So I at least here in Eau Claire, so in the spring election, we were able to keep all 20 polling sites open. We encouraged and asked city employees to step in where the volunteer poll workers were backing away, understandably. So we kept all 20 sites open, but we also opened one of the few drive-through sites. And so we had, for the 2 weeks before the election, almost 4,000 people come through and cast their ballots by just driving up, walking up, biking up to cast their ballots. And for the November election, we had like close to 24,000. So we had over half of all of our votes came in 2 weeks early through a drive-through, situation. And frankly, I think that's going to be here to stay. We used to have 1 drop box. We now have 4 drop boxes around the city. I think that's going to be here to stay. So my sense, at least locally in Eau Claire, is the integrity of the election actually went up because of how we were able to be responsive and help that. I know that wasn't the case in every municipality, and I know it's being kind of attacked at the state level. But my sense is that most people have confidence in their local elections, that somehow it's the other municipality that didn't do it right. And so my hope will be that sustains the confidence of people at the local level. Because we had local clerks that just did an amazing job across the state in doing just an amazing job of conducting fair and accurate and transparent elections. And I think Wisconsin's going to be held up well when this all said and done.
Thanks, Dale. I want to turn now to you, Abby, and to you, TJ, and just ask sort of a follow-up question on your experience. So I don't think there's anybody among us, including everyone in our audience out there this morning, that hasn't had his or her lives upended to some extent from the pandemic. But I'm just interested in any additional personal reflections of just your daily workday and how it's been impacted, and how trying to do your job working from home has impacted you. And are there any other pandemic related impacts that maybe the general public wouldn't be aware of that you've experienced that you'd like to share with us? So I see TJ, you have your mute off. We'll turn to you first, and then we'll ask you to respond to it.
So fortunately, before I took the position in Madison, I was working virtually for an organization already. And one of the reasons that was a huge drawback was I failed to create the work-life balance when working at home, because what tends to happen is that you're at home, you're in the comfort of your home, so you tend to not be able to easily turn off when you're working. So I think like that's one thing that most people don't understand or might not recognize by like educators. Like we have taken this whole culture of what was happening in a building and now putting it in our homes, and we no longer, it's harder to cut it off and on. So the 8 to 5 day or the 7 to 3:30 day for a lot of our teachers, that that doesn't exist anymore. You're literally having teachers working around the clock because for some of our families who we can't connect with in the morning, because I might have a high school student who's also working with their younger siblings, so they're just working in the evening with schoolwork. As a teacher, we want to connect and engage with them, so we find ourselves working more hours than we might traditionally do so when we were in the classroom building.
Thanks, DJ. Abby, your thoughts?
Yeah, I think for the city of Middleton, you know, there has not been really any roadmap for how to deal with this pandemic, and I think that's true for probably every municipality, every business, every household, and it's really affected different departments differently. So, you know, we have seen some really positive outcomes. Like, for example, in terms of public engagement, we have more people that are joining public meetings now that they are all being held remotely on Zoom than we had previously. But also in terms of public engagement, we are less able, I think, to reach people who are not already engaged with our community. So, you know, we had an initiative that we were starting up in the city where we really wanted to become a model for equitable engagement and reach folks in our community who have never been involved with city government before. At the beginning of the pandemic, we basically put that on hold and we said, now is not the time to try to get people engaged via Zoom. It's going to be really hard to get new people to the table remotely. So you know, there have been just a broad range of impacts on different departments in our city. Rob, you mentioned public lands. You know, one of the things that we didn't expect in our community is the overwhelming need for public lands during a pandemic, especially when the state parks were closed. Our public lands department was struggling to keep up with maintaining our trail system because of the huge influx of people that we had in our community using our conservancy and our park space. We actually had to reroute traffic, you know, pedestrian traffic on some of our public trail systems to one way only because we were concerned that there wasn't an ability to socially distance because there were so many people using the trails. On a personal level, working from home has been a struggle with a 5-year-old and a 7-year-old, and you know, my husband's also working from home, and we've always loved living in a small house. We live just a few blocks away from City Hall, where I can walk to work every day, and I've absolutely loved that. And that has been a stressor on our lives now because we don't have the amount of square footage that we need between me and my children when they're doing their virtual learning. So yeah, it's been a huge challenge. And I will say that my employer has been the ultimate flexible employer, which I am so grateful for. Basically, you know, what our city wants us to do is get your work done. We don't care when you get it done and we don't care where you get it done, but you need to get the work done. And that, you know, I know a lot of my friends too are in the same position where, you know, we're getting up at 6 o'clock in the morning to get a couple of hours of work done before we get our kids on their first Zoom meeting. And then we're working at, you know, 9 p.m. to 11 p.m. after the kids are in bed just to get everything done. But flexibility has just been so beneficial during this time that it's absolutely needed because people are really struggling.
Thanks, Abby. And we'll touch upon a few of the themes you rose that you mentioned as we move along here. But I want to direct this next question to Dale, and I then invite any of the others of you to chime in. Dale, as you reflect before you retired, but that 6-month stretch when you were still city manager in the midst of a pandemic, what worked well in terms of city government in Eau Claire and its ability to respond to a crisis that none of us could have ever foreseen? So that's the first part of the question. But the second part is, and what maybe didn't work as well? Were there any structural flaws or just other impediments that just became really clear to you about the ability of a city government to respond in a time of crisis like this?
Sure. Thank you. Good. Excellent question. Well, what worked well was we have a high level of collaboration and cooperation here. So, for example, the city and the county work very well together, as does our neighboring city of Altoona. And so lots of communication back and forth. We're also, other than Dane County and the city of Madison, we're the only municipality that has a joint city-county health department. So a unique, situation with that. So what probably worked well for us for two things. One, we established a very strong incident command system, an emergency government response, with the health department leading that. And we structured it and staffed it and authorized it. And so we had a very unified countywide, incident command structure, which I could talk more about if people wanted to, but that seemed to work, very well. The other was we formed a economic recovery task force very, very early, which was a partnership between Visit Eau Claire, the chamber, the university, the tech school, the other municipalities. And we had various sectors, and we set this up. It was actually it wasn't associated with any one governmental entity or institution. It was led by a former county board chair and a president of the chamber. And so it's really helped connect the business community to the health response. So we have not seen the division between the business community and local government and the health department. And so, there's been differences of opinion, but in terms of, working together as a community, it's just been really, really, really well. And, there's lots of meetings that are happening every week with parties that in other parts of the state are openly and aggressively adversarial to each other. And here we're working together behind the scenes. And that has just been really wonderful to see. And even though there can be very strong disagreements, they're professional, they can agree to disagree, but we still move on, wanting the community to do good. So I think those are the two things that have, really, really gone well. The challenge, actually, from a leadership perspective, to Abby's point, getting people to go home at first actually was a challenge. People didn't want to go home. And so we had to say, no, you are going home. And then how do you create that flexibility and that ability for people to work in those spaces, but also keep them connected to the workplace? So and keeping that culture going. And we've hired a few new people in the last 7 months. And so, for example, hiring a department director from outside the city to come in, and they're leading a department of 150 people, and all they can do is meet with them virtually. I mean, that would be very difficult to sustain long term. The leadership of a large and diverse organization, when you can only meet remotely, the relationships that were already there, you can keep going, you can keep the culture that was there, but to bring new people in and get your culture of collaboration and cooperation online has been a real challenge that's taken intentionality to hopefully keep it going, a positive way.
Lots of important lessons there. Diane, I promise I have a question for you coming up, but before that, I just one follow-up for TJ based on what Dale just said. TJ, I'm interested in your perspective working for a big school district. How have things worked in terms of your school district's working relationships with the private sector? And I know you come from the private sector, but your work with the business community and parents and so forth, and also with other levels of government in Madison and Dane County, the city, the county, et cetera.
I think as a district, we prided ourselves already on having a lot of different partnerships that already existed. However, I think one of the things that's come out of the pandemic is the rationale that we need to have more partnerships than we already have, because there are where we cannot always go. So having someone who worked from like the city, for example, like when we're talking about the lack of Wi-Fi in homes, like how then do we do a better job of partnering with the city? Because there's only so much that we can do as a district, but the city might be able to fill in those gaps. How then do different partners that have already working with different schools to help us support different things from like food pantries, because there were just a lot of needs that we had to make sure that we were meeting. So I think those partnerships really came in handy. So we just began to leverage them more and even build new partnerships during the pandemic.
Great. So again, I want to remind our audience, you can either use the Q&A or the chat function to submit questions. We already have a couple of questions submitted. We'll get to those in just a moment. But I want to ask Diane now to reflect on the structure of local government here in the state of Wisconsin. It's no secret to anybody that on a per capita basis, we have lots of local governments here. And you know, what's your perspective on in terms of what you've observed in the ability of small villages, for example, like Thiensville, where you used to lead the village, its ability to have good working relationships with neighboring governments and having lots of different governments that because of this pandemic really had to get together in ways that perhaps they have not had to previously think about. Is your perception is that that's worked well, or do you think that maybe what we're experiencing here may be food for thought for changes, or how would you respond to that general topic?
My first thought goes to police and fire, EMS. I mean, I want to hand out to all of those people who serve in that category to commend them for working under this pandemic and how hard it is to recruit, especially in small communities that have paid on call and volunteer employees, to try to the ability to recruit them and to maintain and keep them, you know, and I do think it's time to look at regional fires, to look fire departments, regional EMS. I mean, we're all competing for everyone else's employees because they all have this high level of expertise that we all need, and there aren't a lot of people that want to serve in those categories anymore. So I think that's going to be the biggest challenge.
Great, and we'll put in a small plug here. We are, the forum has been working with the governments in Ozaukee County on a fire and EMS enhanced service sharing project. So you'll be hearing more about that in a little bit. Okay, well let's turn now to some audience questions. We have one that sort of follows up on something we've already discussed, but let's ask you to go a little bit deeper. The question is, what benefits has COVID created for government? The questioner knows that there are many drawbacks, but again, any more focus on some of the things we have gained in terms of government from the pandemic and this experience?
Well, I'll chime in. So one of the things that I'm involved with in my role with the city is economic development and working with businesses. And of course, with the pandemic, we've seen some seriously negative impacts to retail, restaurants, and any business that has any relation to tourism. And one of the things that I think has been a positive to come out of this is that we have been a little bit more flexible with businesses in terms of listening to them for what their individual needs are. So to give a couple of small examples, we had a business on University Avenue in Middleton that needed to place a monument sign in public right-of-way. And they needed to do that because it was the only way that they could get the message out that they were there. You couldn't, because of the placement of the lot, you couldn't see a sign in any other location. And I don't think our city would have looked favorably on doing that previously, but they were willing to do it because of the pandemic. Another small example is we had a local restaurant that asked to borrow some picnic tables from a park that, you know, had a shelter that was under construction. They weren't being used. And we were able to be flexible and drop those off and allow them an opportunity to have some outdoor seating without having to invest in tables themselves. So those are just two small examples, but I think listening to individual business concerns is something that we've been much more open to, and I hope that that will continue going on into the future.
Great answer. Dale or TJ or Diane, any response that you would have to that question?
Sure. So I would say I agree completely with what Abby said, the flexibility for businesses. So, our willingness to close down streets, to do permits, to waive fees, to do, different things, recognizing their struggles. And that, now is not a time to continue to, or not continue, but, now is not a time to, to hold the line, really hard on certain things. And so, again, if you can waive fees, if you can waive deadlines, anything we could do to help the business community get through this, because we want to be a partner with them, right? This isn't an adversarial relationship. So anything we could, so I agree completely with Abby there. The other two things I would add to that are just online services. We've been able, we took things that, I was with the city for 31 years. There were, projects we've been working on for decades, and all of a sudden we got them done within months or weeks. So things that we thought we couldn't do, or there were obstacles to. So, everything from, inspections that are being done, online, to permits to be, that can be processed, to things that can be submitted online. How do you still provide those services without people having to actually come in your building? And so we made huge leaps with that. I suspect that will stay, and that's been a positive. And then the elections, as I talked about earlier, I think the way in which we're offering elections and the different avenues that people have to get their vote processed in a fair and transparent way will be around for a while.
So let me go to another question from our audience. Speaking of elections, this questioner is interested in knowing how the support from your elected officials has been during the pandemic, particularly given the polarization that exists in both the state and the country over the pandemic, as well as over the election and its aftermath. So how has that experience been for you, and how are you able to stay focused on your mission given the political divisiveness that we have seen? So just raise your hand, whoever wants to jump into that audience question first.
Well, I could start. So, as a city manager, I report directly to and am hired by, the city council. And I would just have to say that I had absolutely full and amazing, support for what we needed to do. So early on, they declared an emergency, which essentially allows the city manager to be able to do anything that needed to be done to respond to it, and that continued for the full 7 months. And then I would report back to them with what we were doing. So, we avoided a lot of the division, and I had absolutely full support from the council to do what was needed, and again kept them appraised of what we were doing and how we were doing it. And so, we opened up our ICE center for our people experiencing homelessness, the things we did to change the elections, and different rules and things that, again, waiving fees, opening streets, doing different things. I couldn't be more complimentary of the support that we saw at the local level, from what we needed from our elected officials to be able to respond on the ground from an administrative perspective.
So Abby or TJ, I don't know if you have any perspective on that. And, TJ is particularly, not only dealing with your school board, but obviously just the very decision to go virtual and to stay virtual, very contentious in many quarters. So any insights that you have or thoughts you have in terms of the support from elected officials?
I think one of the things that we just made an early decision as far as the district is that what we wanted to make sure is that we were doing what was right by our students, right? And we recognize that while for some of our students, it was better to have them in the classroom, with the number of cases and the way that things were going in Madison and Dane County, it just made sense to keep our students at home. And so I think that's just been something we've been leading with doing what's right for the kids and doing what's right. And not even just for our kids, but just thinking about our staff, right? We have a number of students a number of faculty and staff members who are at high risk. And so the moment we bring them back, we put them at risk at the same time. So we've had to do a really good job of partnering with, our MTI, our teachers union, with our board, with Dane County and everyone around it to just do what's right by our stakeholders.
Diane, it looked like you may have wanted to chime in there, and I'd also ask you to reflect on just generally before you left government. Clearly, the increasing polarization we're seeing throughout our country was occurring and was running rampant while you were still there. So, your reflections.
I mean, pre-pandemic, we were all talking about what does the zoning code say? What do the ordinances say? And for all of the elected officials to be willing to look and say, well, now we're going to allow you to have outdoor seating in areas we wouldn't have had before for restaurants, and all of those concessions that they've made, I think is a tool to look by and say, how are we going to do this in the future? Probably how we did it during the pandemic.
And Abby, it looks like you wanted to say something here too.
It's not as fun of an answer, but I would just agree with Dale. In Middleton, you know, our city council and mayor have been really lockstep supportive of the staff, and they understand the safety and health concerns. And I think their first and foremost goal is to make sure that we're keeping as many people safe and healthy as we can. They have put some additional measures in place for folks who are continuing to work in the office, which is a really small subset of our employee base. But you know, they're doing enhanced cleanings and new air infiltration systems in the buildings. So that's been really good to see the support from elected officials. One thing I would mention that I think is really a neat thing that has sprung from this is that we have a grassroots effort that has emerged. It's called the Good Neighbor Hub, because Middleton is the Good Neighbor City. And it was started just by a resident who was worried about people in the community being able to meet basic needs during the pandemic. Like, you know, elderly folks who are at high risk being able to get groceries, and, you know, students being able to get access to healthy meals and those kinds of things that really we're not normally involved with as a city. But he's pulled this hub together that's meeting weekly, and now it involves the superintendent of the school district, several elected officials, and our mayor, our city administrator, key city staff, as well as just members from the community who want to gather information about how we can help people who are the most vulnerable in our community. And they've actually set up, I have a yard sign in my front yard that I'm one of the contacts for the Good Neighbor Hub. So anyone who's experiencing any needs in our community can see the sign, find out who their contact person is, and reach out with those needs, no matter how big or small they may be. And we're trying to use this resource to help people in our community who need it.
Great.
Rob, part of your question was, you know, around mission, and you just wanted to touch on that a little bit. That, you know, if you think of the mission of a city, and I think of it in terms of a pyramid, and it starts with having a safe community that has to then be functional, and then it can be meaningful, and then it can be fun. And each one of those has to build on the other. And so, you know, this pandemic has really caused us to think, you know, hard and be very focused and intentional about how do you still be safe and functional, not only for your city employees, but for all of your residents. And then, you know, to Abby's point, you know, the meaningful and taking care of those who you know, don't have all the resources or the opportunities to be able to handle this as well. And then you still have to try to do some fun. I mean, just for the mental health. I mean, the mental health challenges with this are huge for people. And so, you know, keeping a focus on all four aspects of that: safe, functional, meaningful, and fun. I think the pandemic has really helped us understand that how important that is for the community. And you know, I think municipal employees are really stepping up to the plate to make sure that they are providing communities for their citizens that are, you know, safe, functional, meaningful, and fun, and in some very creative ways, you know, like the example that Abby, you know, shared.
So let's turn to the future. And I'd like to ask all four of you to respond to this. But pre-pandemic, one of the huge challenges facing both local governments and school districts was employee retention and recruitment. We had historically low unemployment rates, on top of just the ordinary challenges. That was a real concern. Hopefully we'll get back to that point where we have record low levels of unemployment. But regardless, as you look ahead, to the ability of local governments and school districts to recruit talented personnel, to retain them once they've recruited them. Has the pandemic and the response made that task easier or perhaps more difficult, given look at what everybody in government, has been required to do in terms of going above and beyond. So maybe we'll go alphabetically on this one as well. So we'll put you on the spot, Abby. You're the youngest, so you can be put on the spot first.
Yeah, it's a great question, and I think it probably depends on the role. I know, there have been a lot of news pieces recently about how difficult it is to be a public health official right now. And I cannot imagine being in that role, or being, a school board member right now would be incredibly challenging because of the polarization that you've mentioned, and because there are some roles where you're going to make half the people angry and half the people happy, but you're never going to make everyone happy if you're doing your job right. In some of our departments, I think that it's possible that the flexibility that our community has offered to employees during this time will be an attractive recruitment tool. But in other cases, like especially with our first responders, they've been kind of on the front lines of this, and they're experiencing a lot of fatigue amongst their employees with, constant exposures to COVID, and also in terms of responding to the mental health effects that the pandemic has had on members of our community. So I think for first responders, I think it's probably going to be even more challenging to be able to recruit employees who want to serve in that really challenging role. But, for the quality of life departments, I think it might be a bit easier. So I guess I would just say it depends.
Oh, great answer. TJ, you have any thoughts on that question?
Agreed. I think it depends. I think what's made it hard for us is we rely on human connection. And so one of the things that it has been proven hard is making that human connection with students that you might not have met for the first time. Like in the spring, it was different because they had already been in the classroom for a semester, and then we went out. But this time at the start of school year, a lot of teachers were meeting students for the very first time, and they were meeting them through a screen. And so that kind of made it harder. So I also just think about how like a lot of people are just might not be going to education right now because of the pandemic. And so it just kind of makes it harder for us to actually recruit, because it's kind of hard. Like we really don't know like what tomorrow is going to look like. So when you ask an applicant says, well, what like tomorrow? The reality of it is we just don't know until we can really get a handle on this pandemic.
Yeah, no, excellent point. And there's just so much uncertainty on so many different levels, but we'll turn now to Dale.
Sure, thank you. And that's a really good question. I would say, like it has been mentioned, for some professions, it might be more challenging. And the obvious one is health and public health and health directors. The other is police. We didn't talk today about George Floyd and the fact that, we had all of the systemic racism, issues that we're bringing forward, and work that needed to be done there, and the heightened awareness of that came during a pandemic. But recruiting police officers, I think, is going to be challenging, when in environments. So I think certain professions, health and police. But I do think on the flip side of that is people realize that cities provide, back to your first question, Rob, core services. Talk about essential services, right? What is more essential than keeping water coming into houses and sewer working and police and fire services? And so, if people are worried about wanting careers that are going to be essential and important, that's really been heightened right now, and in a positive way. So I think people will be there. And then finally, it's going to be the workplace culture. And how did we do? I mean, did we demonstrate that we are good employers? Did we provide that flexibility? Did we take care of you, right, as an employee? Did we protect you physically, even though you had a dangerous job? Did we keep you socially connected, and did we care about your mental health? So, if we created the right culture and a good culture in a pandemic, and people understand the essence and importance of the services we provide, I think we can still be and will be a positive and good place for people to work.
Great. And Diane, you get the last word.
Good. I think it'll be harder to recruit good employees, particularly police and fire. But I think once you find those committed employees and find the right ones, you'll be stronger and far better off.
Great. Well, some words of wisdom to end the program on. So that does wrap up our panel discussion. We're out of time. I again want to thank our panelists for a provocative conversation. And I want to thank all of you for tuning in and for generously supporting the Wisconsin Policy Forum. For those of you who are new to the forum and are interested in joining, please visit our website at wispolicyforum.org. Also, if your organization or government already is a member, don't forget that applies to all of your employees. So if you know of work colleagues who should be on our email list and currently are not, please send us their addresses. Also, don't forget to follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and LinkedIn. We hope you'll now grab a beverage and lunch or a snack and tune in to our Salute program at noon. You should have received an email from us with a separate link to view the Salute Awards program. If you haven't, or if you have any questions, please email info@wispolicyforum.org. Thanks again so much for joining us and for your support of the forum, and we hope to see you virtually at noon. Thanks again.